But let's move on to the Cavaliers here, which feels like another one of those many Eastern Conference teams where, like, who the hell knows? Because apparently Collin Sexton is available. And if he's gone, what does this team have? Jarrett Allen is a restricted free agent. Darius Garland showed a lot of improvement this past season, but what is he going to be? Like, we still don't really know, and he's going to be eligible for a raise before too long. Kevin Love is still on the roster. Isaac Okoro remains disappointing. Jetty Osman remains disappointing. So it's hard to like really figure it out. I kind of leaned into the idea of finding as much relatively cheap upside as possible. So I kept landing on Josh Hart, both because he feels like a good fit for the roster and because it is well established that he's very good friends with Larry Nance Jr. So maybe they'll want to play together. And that's about as much reasoning as I have here.
I'd be curious to see what the sign and trade would look like for that, just because they're not going to have the cap space to go after him unless they renounce Jarrett Allen, which even if they draft,
possible.
if they draft Evan Mobley, it would, to me, I guess I won't say a disaster, but it would be less than ideal if they let Jarrett Allen walk for nothing. So my guess would be if you draft Evan Mobley, you're fine having both, which I'm actually okay with, because as the Cavs right now, they have a lot of players that intrigue me, but none of them are your tentpole star. You can't say that about Sexton. I think just looking at what Garland does as a playmaker and then even as a pull-up shooter, he might be your better bet to do that, but he's not guaranteed to be that. Just how is the talent and figure it out later. And if you need to move Mobley or Allen down the line, you can. But I guess if you draft Evan Mobley, in theory, that would open up Jarrett Allen sign and trade scenarios, which doesn't help you with Josh Hart, but that's just something to think about. I expect Jarrett Allen to be back, unless I don't know the team that's going to come in and just offer Jarrett Allen so much money that the Cavs are like, buy.
Charlotte should.
But if they come in at like $18 million a year, I don't know that that's enough to get Cleveland to flinch.
I would come in at 20 if I'm Charlotte.
Wow. So I have them projected right now as a non-taxpayers mid-level team, and they're interesting because I think that you probably just need to still play the youth card here. I don't know. There are a lot of wings that could fit, and that seems like what they need, but can you just sort of rehabilitate some values, get some like second draft type guys? Like this could be a good Frank Ntilikina destination. I know people who listen to the podcast are going to troll me for that.
No, I think that's legitimate though, because that is the kind of player that Cleveland should be looking at right now. You want to find those relatively young guys where you can either rehabilitate their value to the point that you get something back for them in a trade, or they're a legitimate rotation member when you're ready to compete. I think that's exactly the kind of player they should target.
I don't know if the mid-level exception is really enough to get them involved with this type of player. But Talon Horton Tucker, the youngest free agent of the bunch, is someone that they could really look at. I would actually love Gary Trent Jr. for this team. They just don't have the money. But like those types of go after just the younger guys here. And there like aren't a ton of like super intriguing ones, especially when you're looking at what the Cavaliers have to spend. Terrence Davis, very questionable human being, and that's probably putting it kindly, but that's someone that they could really look at and I think would help their team. We've mentioned Garrison Matthews already. Justice Winslow, this might be a good Justice Winslow destination too. He's still, I forget that Winslow's only 25. I feel like he's 80 for some reason. That's the route I'm looking at if I'm this team. I could also just see them like, I guess maybe I won't say that, but if they want to kind of keep themselves more flexible, do they sort of sit free agency out aside from re-signing Jarrett Allen is my point.
It'd be another good spot for Marvin Bagley. If they want to get in on whatever sweepstakes exist for Jarrett Culver. Again, like we're kind of focusing on any of those younger guys who have established potential that has not been realized.
Here, that is interesting. Would you do, if you're the Cavs, what would you need in addition to Jarrett Culver to give the Timberwolves Larry Nance Jr.? Like, does Josh Okogie and Jarrett Culver do it?
I think so. Just because of just for the timeline alone.
Yeah, I might argue probably not, just because Okogie's entering the last year of his deal and he's just such an offensive minus. But like Naz Reid, I don't know that they need another big on this team, even though Larry Nance Jr. would be sent out. But if you draft Mobley, you definitely don't need a Naz Reid. Maybe, is it a protected first that like is lottery protected for 2 seasons before turning into 2 seconds or something? Like, because if you're Minnesota, I don't know that you could justify trading a flat out first. But let's say the deal's a lottery protected first, and oh my God, What was and Jared Culver. And maybe you don't even need that. You're right. Jared Culver, like if the high upside swing's still there, 2 years left on his rookie scale deal, like maybe that does it. So Jared Culver,
but I could
Josh
see
Okogie,
Minnesota giving up more just because Nance is such an ideal fit for that roster too. So like you could be onto something with like that top 20 protected that's going to turn into 2 firsts.
Would you do Jaden McDaniels and Jared Culver for Larry Nance?
I would try to part with Okogie first.
I don't know that I might be too high on McDaniels, I think is what I'm finding through this podcast.
Fair enough.
Anything else on Cleveland? Is there, I think Larry Nance Jr. can help a lot of good teams. I think he is probably, I know people are going to say Kevin Love, but I think Larry Nance Jr. is the player on this team that's most likely to be traded, unless it's Collin Sexton. But you so rarely see these dudes on rookie scale deals get dealt because he's making $6.3 million next year. You can't net back a ton. Yeah, you could use it as a means to grease to grease the wheels of a Kevin Love dump, but you don't want to use Collin Sexton to do that. And so
I still don't even know why they're even thinking about trading him.
I guess because they don't know if they want to pay him between $20 and $25 million a year. But to me, that's like
you can trade him so easily at the deadline.
That's what I was going to say.
Why not go and see what you have first?
Yeah, don't extend him then, and then trade him at the deadline if you want to. So, but I'm not using him to grease the wheels of a Kevin Love salary dump. I'm definitely not.
Definitely not.
Would you agree that Nance is the player most likely to be traded,
yes,
or do you think
I would? I don't think Love has any value left, so they're probably not going to want to give up assets to move him, which is probably necessary.